Hello ladies and gentlemen, Adam Steele from Hotpost Studios here, and today I'm really excited because I'm going to show you a magic trick. You ready? I'm going to combine this Loadbox with this professional digital cabinet simulator. Ready? Here we go. Say abracadabra. Wow! So there we go. That's turned this into the 2 Notes Engineering Captor X. So before we get on with our really deep dive on exactly what this thing can do, which is what we do like to do here, do subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Check out our Discord where we all chat as a community, and our Patreon where we can really get support to make more and more of these kinds of videos. So let's rewind a second. What exactly is this? The Torpedo Captor X is a little white box that you're probably going to see more and more on top of people's amps, on stage, in the studio, because it does a lot of things, and it does a lot of things very well. It's all the technology that the company 2 Notes have been working on for years and years, pretty much all sandwiched into one little box. So the first and most obvious thing that this Captor X can do is it's a load box. It's rated at 8 ohms and it can take up to 100 watts out of your guitar amp, which means if you've got something that's really like a big head like this 5150 and you're absolutely blasting it pretty loud, you can plug a speaker cable straight from that into here instead of your speaker cabinet, and it will just take it and it'll be able to run silently. From there you can then take a line out from the back here, which is on XLRs, which can then go, if you're playing live, to the front of house sound guy, who can then have that through the speakers and through the foldback monitors at whatever reasonable volume they need. Or if you're at home or in the studio, you can have these XLR outs going to an audio interface or a mixing desk or whatever it is that you need. Now the original Captor did this as well, but there's one more thing that they both do, and then the similarities kind of end. These are also both attenuators. So what you can do is you can plug your really loud guitar head into one of these and then out to a speaker cabinet, and with the original Captor it could take 20 decibels off the volume, which, to give you a rough idea, is, I think, about half as loud. It's a tenth of the power that goes through. That's how decibels kind of work. So it comes out roughly sounding about half as loud. Now the Captor X can do that, but it can also, on a little switch, go even quieter. So it can knock, I think it was 38 dB they said off, which with a really loud amp means you're going to get conversational level volume, which means that you can run your favourite amp, have a little bit of volume coming out the speakers so that you can play at home, flick the switch up to the middle position if you're playing live and you don't want to swamp the entire stage out, or if for some reason that's just not loud enough, flick the switch all the way up to full, and that's the full power of your amp then going through. But at the same time, even with the full power of the amp going through on full mode, it still capturing the sound of your head for the other side of this, and this is what makes it really cool. So this is what these two have in common. This is the Torpedo Cab M. This is the latest generation of 2Note's its cabinet simulation. So virtual cabinets. What's happening here is obviously you're not using, if you're using this as a load box, then obviously you're not using your real cabinet. At that point, you'll want your guitar amp to sound realistic so that you can get something that you recognize as a sound, because if you've ever heard a guitar head without a cabinet, it sounds terrible. It sounds like this. Because the rest of the sound comes from the way the cabinet filters off a lot of that horrible top end, gives you some of this kind of low range thump and clarity and whatever it is that your particular cabinet gives you as a sound quality. Now the Cab M is designed to either run just a preamp, which doesn't have the power section into it, or run something like a load box, like the Captor, and then run that into here. So that's where the Captor X fuses all of this into one box. On the back it's got this red speaker in jack, which has got a red nut on there so that it makes it very obvious that's where you should stick the speaker in, because a speaker in is so high powered, if it's not in the wrong connection, something could go bang. Then there's speaker out, which then goes to the cabinet. Currently, the Captor X is only for 8-ohm loads and 8-ohm cabinets, which is a little bit limiting. Some amps are only 16 ohm, some cabinets are only 16 ohm. 4 ohm is a lot rarer. I am told that a 16 ohm version of this is in the works and will be out at some point in the near future. But most amps can quite happily do 8 ohms, usually either with a switch or multiple jacks on the back of an amp. The Marshall JCM 800 over there that I've got has got several jacks on the back, so you just pick the correct one. The PV has got a switch, so I just pick what's correct. When this is taking a load, there is a fan inside, and when you plug it in and turn your amp on, if you're not playing anything, the fan won't do much. Don't worry about that. The fan is connected to the load. What that means is the more noise you put through the amp, the more the load in here is going to get hot, and that prompts the fan to then kick up and start spitting the heat out. Because when a valve amp makes a lot of noise, it's also generating a lot of heat, and that heat has got to go somewhere. Just as a side note, this is one of the main reasons why a lot of speakers have a wattage rating, like the old Greenback's 25 watts. If you put more than 25 watts into one of those speakers for a little while, it should be okay in the very short term, but what that's about is it can't get rid of that heat, which means over time it's going to get very hot. And if you've ever heard stories of guitar speakers catching fire and that kind of thing, that's usually from misunderstandings and put too much power through speakers that aren't designed for that. So this is designed to take 100 watts RMS load. Generally that means, as a broad brushstroke, if you've got a 50 watt guitar amp, no problems. If you've got a 100 watt guitar amp, probably no problems as well. If you've got something like one of the old Marshall Plexis or something like this 5150 is a really good example. These are rated as a 120 watt output, but what that means is that's 120 watts maximum output. If I run the volume on this on, say, 2 out of 10, which is where you would usually run one of these amps to get a sound that is appropriate for modern rock and metal, it's quite happy running with the Captor X. If I was to absolutely gun the volume to 10 and run the input volume on 10 and play some like doom metal-y kind of thing, over time that might cause some damage to this unit. Be careful there, but generally speaking, it's not going to be a problem for most people. Now, unlike some of 2Note's older units, like the Torpedo Live, which was like a rack-mounted older version of this in the Torpedo Studio, the Captor doesn't have a screen. This is something that struck me as a little odd at first. Then I stopped and thought about it. And the reason that this isn't so much of a problem now is that this whole thing is that this is remote controllable, not just by USB to change everything. It's also got a MIDI input, so if you've got a pedal board with one of those MIDI switches, like one of the Boss, I think it's ES8, or something like a Gig Rig G2, you can change what cabinets are being used here just by a click of a button. There's also a preset switch on the front with 6 knobs. So if I was to set 6 different presets that I knew I might use commonly or during a gig, because this can hold way more than 6 presets, but if I had the first 6 as really common things, I could just go over to this in the middle of a show and just move this knob over by 1. That will change everything. Also, these are controllable by your phone. Now there's an iOS app, there's an Android app as well. You can connect by Bluetooth to it, and you can change anything you want remotely without having to have a screen in the unit, because you can see everything nice and clearly on a much bigger, nice, colourful device. Now, I was going to show you a demo of this using the PV5150, but unfortunately, I blew it up. I used a Mesa preamp into it, ran it all the way full volume, like I was saying, and the Captor was absolutely fine, but I think this poor aged thing needs a bit of attention from an amp tech. So, luckily for me, I can just use the 6505. Now I've got this thing plugged in. The 6505 has its volume a little louder than I would usually have it. I'm going to try playing this at full volume just for a second. So that's with no microphones on the cab. This is probably going to clip the hell out of this mic and cause a lot of feedback. Yeah, that's way too loud, and that's way too loud for most stages, but it sounds great. So if I step that down to 20 dB attenuation, this is still going to be loud. But you can't hear me above that really. I said you can't hear me above that really, because it's blasting. Now, depending on what I want to do, if I go for the lowest attenuation, which is minus 38, that is the volume of the cabinet and the volume of a little bit coming through the monitors all at the same time. See, I can talk over that, and you can probably make me out over that if I speak up a bit. But turn off these entirely, so it's just the cabinet. You can definitely hear me over that. So I can have just a little bit of volume coming through the cabinet. Maybe I might start doing this in the live room, actually, because then I can have a guitarist sat next to the cabinet. They get a little bit of sound. And that means that they can have a little bit of comfort to the side of them. They can feel it going. We can have an absolutely roaring tone in here and not even have to use any cabinets. So now let's turn the camera around and let's look at how this all works. So I've turned the camera around now and we've got the Mesa V twin preamp and 50/50 power amp, which is when combined essentially a dual rectifier, essentially, and that's all feeding into the Torpedo Captor X. And you can hear there's not a lot of background noise from it, which is ridiculous for an amp that's got this much gain. And there's a reason for that. Let's switch the camera so you can see the screen. This is the Torpedo remote. And feature number 1 down here is the wonderful gate. If I do this, you can hear lots and lots of gain. And there's nothing on right now apart from the cabinet, obviously, and 2 microphones which I've selected and moved them around a little bit. And the gate, if I turn off the gate, you can hear a little bit of bumping and banging. If I take my fingers off the strings, you get a lot of noise. If I turn on the gate and adjust the threshold from noise to not noise, I can really tighten that up. And if I go for the hard gate, which is very metal gate, it's got a real tight open and close. Definitely comes into play when you're using something like a tube screamer in front of a heavy amp and you've got so many gain stages. It can get a bit crazy. But then, of course, you've got your microphones. If I bypass those, this is how it sounds with no cabinet. Horrible. But what I can do instead is just mute one of these and just have one microphone. And do it the other way around as well. You always get a choice of 8 microphones. That's different depending on which cab you buy. There are loads that you can get, including, of course, my own shameless plug. This cabinet is exactly the one that you will have seen next to me right here. Coincidence? I think not. And from here, we can start looking at some of these really cool features. If there's only one guitarist, but you want to sound absolutely huge, this is where the twin tracker comes in, because I can go from this to this. And that has balance switches literally left and right. So if you're running a rig through two different output devices, you can change the volume relation there, which might be really useful if you're running this into like a secondary amp or something crazy like that, and you don't want it to come out there quite as loud. The tightness control there looks like it changes things from just a little bit of delay on that right hand side, so it's almost mono but not quite, all the way around the other side there's a big delay, which sounds really, really loose but sounds about a mile wide. Personally, I prefer the tightness over on this kind of 30%-ish thing to get. Of course, in the studio, if you have the option of recording a left channel and a right channel, you very definitely can. But quite often, either the twin tracker is a really cool effect you can use, or what it does is it actually delays the right-hand side. So if you decide later on that you don't want the effect at all, that you've changed your mind, you can just change the input for that guitar that you recorded to be the left channel. And hey presto, back to being a mono guitar. So I'm going to turn this off for a second. I mean, I've gone for a heavy sound here, but if I wanted to, I can go to something a little cleaner. Whoops. Yes, this is actually what the clean sound sounds like on an old Recto. They just don't really do cleany clean. If I go for less output. Something I actually quite like personally. But that's a thing for another day. Now we can start looking at some cool new features.
The EQ is exactly what it says. On guitar mode, the frequencies are directed to be appropriate for metal. So you've got like low bass, kind of low mid, honky body, so I can really scoop some out. Probably more appropriate on a heavy tone for this. I can use 2K to push up some fizziness, or 6K for that real air, and change those out to taste. If this was bass mode, it's just different EQ points, focusing more on the super low end. And then custom is very clever, and I tend to use the custom mode if I'm going to use it at all, because it's got a super low cut, so I can take out things from like 100 hertz down, which for recording is really, really useful because it means I don't have to do that later. It doesn't sound quite as thumpy, but with the EQ off, it does need a little bit of work in a studio mixing context, because to a point low end is not our friend in the studio, especially on guitars, but that's a separate thing. Now reverb, this is where it gets really cool, because this reverb is stereo, and there's room and there's ambience. So the room you can hear in stereo is very much a short, early reflections type of reverb, which really is designed not to be a noticeable reverb, but to sit you in a space. So with this on, there's a dry wet, of course. And if I reach over, I can change the space knob, and you can actually see the space knob and the dry wet are both changing as I'm moving this with my left hand. So I'm going all the way left, all the way right. So I can go without changing anything physically on the screen. I can go from this to this and anywhere in between. So that's a bit much, but if I change to the ambience mode, that's much longer, and that can give you that real hair in the wind solo kind of tone. So you can change the size of that reverb to be a little smaller. The echo is a different parameter entirely, which is more to do with echo time. Colour is to do with diffusion, I think. So you can make it more like that room reverb again, or really kind of expand it out a bit. And then width is what it says. You can have a mono reverb so it doesn't stand out. I mean, here's an interesting thing while I'm talking about the stereo-ness on this. This is technically a stereo unit, this Loadbox, because it has the twin tracker and it has the stereo reverb, but it does only accept a mono input. It's designed to run with one amp because it's only got one load box. But for what these cost, I mean, these cost about half as much as something like an aux box or a Wazzer expander. So you could actually, if you really wanted to run 2 amps, just buy 2 of these. And yeah, that's a lot of money at that point. But if that's what you really want to do, is you really want stereo valve sound, hey, you know. Epic. So if I back that back off, I do like to have some room reverb in my guitar tones, but just a small amount. And the EQ, let's leave that flat. I can always tweak that. But the enhancer is where it gets really cool for me. So I'm going to start with this all the way dry and bring some of this stuff in. In fact, I'm going to leave these at the bottom because this is designed to be a parallel process. This is where it gets really clever. So the enhancer used to be low and high, and I personally never really liked it. I'm guessing anyone who's used two-note stuff before, that may not have been their experience. They may have liked it, but the new body thickness and brilliance absolutely sell it for me. So thickness is not the same as just bumping up the low on the EQ. Listen to this. So this is already quite a thick tone. If I pull up the thickness to say 50%, that's overkill, but listen. It does a certain thing. It does a certain thing that's rather dynamic, and the low end kind of thumps. So what I could do, have the thickness is off for a second, and listen to this. And so if I bring in the thickness, it's got a little too much on the low end. I'll turn on the EQ and shelve out some of this ultra low. So suddenly, it's gone from this, which is nice, to this, which for me really has a noticeable chunk kind of thing. I mean, not everybody's going to be using this for metal and rock, I know, but you can also use this on any kind of tone to get that kind of real lively thumpness in your tone without being overbearing on the ultra low end. The next thing is brilliance. And again, this is a clever parallel process where this is going to add high end, and I'm going to just strike a chord and bring up the brilliance. And without. And with again. So that's given me suddenly all that sharp, kind of thick clarity, which isn't the same as just bumping up a specific EQ point. And when you double track it with the thickness and the brilliance at the right proportions, it can really bring a guitar tone to life without any nastiness. And you do still have, with the custom EQ, the scope to change all this as well. So if I can hear a specific kind of resonance that I'm not particularly fond of, that dual rectifiers do, around 600-ish hertz. Let's just find it. Yeah, that honk thing. Let's just take a few dB out there, not 7 dB. That's way too much, but 4. That sounds really nice, but a little bright, so I can just back some brilliance off now. Now, I know that dual rectifier's kind of fizzy and buzzy and doesn't have any attack on. That's that amp, and they just do that thing. So you do get that kind of thing where there's not too much attack on it. It's just a style. Now then, there's body. And body is a very nice little thing. If you're slamming this a little too loud, you will notice a volume dip when you turn on body. It's kind of a parallel compressor that affects mostly the mids. So if I'm doing something soloish, so if I go to my neck pickup here and go, that's quite a thick tone, so I'm going to back the thickness off. And I'm going to add in some body. I'm going to switch to the bridge pickup again, because I quite often find a bridge pickup to be a little shrill on a solo, but let's really go for it on the body. And I think that parallel compression from the body there is just giving me some low mid sustain that is there in the preamp in a way, but because this is not actually using mics and moving speakers, this is just kind of making up for that and kind of meeting the shortfall and really making it feel real. So the thickness is the one that I tend to play with depending on the part for the guitar, but I generally personally tend to leave body and brilliance just kind of on a little bit all the time, and then just kind of especially brilliance I'm a little careful with, but body just kind of stays on. And that whole thing just works for me. Didn't actually mention earlier that the IR loader is in here as well. You can load up 2 of your favorite impulse responses if for whatever reason the inbuilt cabs, of which there are many. There are a whole host of 2x12s, 4x12s, open backs, closed backs, bass cabs. There's all sorts of stuff in there that you can either that either comes with it or that you can just buy as a little add-on. But if none of them are doing it for you and you've got specific impulse responses that you like, you can load those in. And so you can play with user IRs. I don't think I've got many on here right now, but there's a Sir one, a Zilla Fat Boy. They sound great. And it's not as if that was going to be that different from that one, because that's a Zilla cab. That's a Zilla cab. Yes, they're different cabs, I know, but the tonal character is going to be there. And so you can add and remove as many as you like. And one thing that is important to note is that if you want to load your own 2 notes cabs that weren't on there before or impulses, you do have to connect it to a PC or a Mac and use the Torpedo remote software to get those files on there. But then if you're out at a show or a rehearsal room thing or whatever, you can choose between any of these presets and basically turn any of these knobs and load in the IRs that are already on there using the iOS and Android app, which I've done a couple of times. Not with the Captor X, I've done it with the Cab M, but now I've got the Captor X, I know I can do that live, and it's very, very exciting. Now, one thing that they do make up for with the fact that there's no screen on the Captor X is that I now could save this as one of my presets. Now that's come up on a different screen, so if I move this over, I'm going to add this as preset 6 and just overwrite it there, because presets 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, if I twist this knob that's on the front of it that literally says preset 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, I can change all of those without having to look at any screen at all. I mean, yes, you can see this, but if I was to get a piece of paper and write down exactly what presets 1 to 6 were and gaffer tape that to the top of the Captor X, then I know exactly then, in the middle of a show, if I don't use a MIDI switch or anything like that, which you can also do, then I can just go up to the knob and just go click. Okay, for this song, I'm using a 2x12 open back with this, and for this song, I'm using a 4x12. For this song, I'm using a 1x12 with a, one of these 2 microphones could be in the back of the cabinet. And, there's so much potential. And chances are, I mean, if you're using this without a MIDI switcher live, you're probably not going to use more than 6 presets, because again, the amount of brain power you have live, you probably be focusing on the playing and maybe what pedals are on, that kind of thing, more than you are choosing this cab, that cab, this cab. But if you want to have, like, I don't know, if you've got an amp and a board that's got MIDI on, you could have any preset, not just these 6. So you could have this tone goes to this tone goes to that. And then that's probably the way I would do it if I was more of a live guitar player. I'm more of a live bass player personally, so this is a little weird for me. But It means that you could then plan that all out in advance, and when you press a single button on your MIDI switcher, that changes everything, including the exact sound on here. So you can do some very clever stuff in advance with preparation, and do even more clever stuff in the show. One more really cool thing that I'm going to talk about for a minute is this is some of the files from that track that I played earlier, and this is the bass tone. So it's about a mile wide, and here's one part of the bass tone. Which is the two notes La bass on its clean channel, going into the two notes Cab M with a big 8x10 stack, typical clean bass tone. And then I actually fed the through output of that into that dirty nasty, that's the Mesa V Twin, with kind of a bass friendly setting on it. And then that's going into the Torpedo Captor X with the twin tracker on, and with the EQ, so it still had everything set up as if it was a guitar amp. But the EQ, what I did is I was on a custom mode like this, but I had the low end really scooped out here, and the twin tracker, like I said, was on. And so it was like running that through a guitar amp, but all the low end is cleaned out. And combining that with the thick lows that are in mono in the middle, that is a really thick tone for bass, and that's going to sit quite nicely underneath these really busy rhythm guitars. So by the time you see this, it will already be mixed, of course. Time is a weird construct. But yeah, there are so many features in the Captor X, I'm well impressed. Back to me in the studio.
But wait, there's more. That stereo reverb and that twin tracker, anything that's in stereo, there's a headphone output on the front. And if I plug headphones into there, and I've tried this, it sounds, because of the 3D reverb and everything, so nice to play. And the twin tracker, if you like heavy stuff, like heavy rock, heavy metal, it can be really quite inspiring on rhythm parts to suddenly have a big 3D chug-a-chug-chug-chug thing. And I've been using a pair of Sennheiser HD 650s with that, which are notoriously difficult to get decent level out of. And with the headphones on this just above 12 o'clock, that was more than enough level for me, which is good to know that there's more. So if I'm using a less loud amp, then that's something I can compensate for. And if my presets are a little lower so they're not clipping going out, then I know I'll be able to monitor that properly as well. When using the headphones, the knobs on the front become very useful because the output level is pretty much for that exclusively. The voicing then changes the way that it comes out the headphone output so that there's more of a mid scoop going one way and a mid push going the other way. So if in headphones you're used to hearing something with more mids or less mids, if you'd rather have more bass and a bit of brightness, you don't have to change the preset, you don't have to change anything, you just change the voicing knob and there you go. And then there's the space knob, which if you've got the twin tracker on, will change how big and wide the twin tracker is, and if that's not on, it can change the reverb dry and wet, so you can get more reverb coming through, and that's all without using the interface. I can just move over, grab that, change that, and the voicing knob especially has a nice little click in the center so that I can feel where it's supposed to be when I'm not trying to use my personal preference. So this thing can do a lot, but the last thing I think I should talk about here is the price. So in the UK right now, these are £549, which isn't particularly cheap, But then the original Captor, I think, was somewhere around 250, and the Cab M was just above 300, because there's some pretty complicated little gadgets with a lot of features. And when you add those together, you add the prices together, makes a lot of sense. The competition for this, though, is a lot more expensive. Honestly speaking, there are two major competitors to the Captor X, and that's the Universal Audio aux box and the Boss Waza tube amp expander. Both of those are very clever units, designed for slightly different markets, I feel. The aux is really simplified, and the Waza Boss has so many features that I think you'll find one thing and stick to it, but there's some clever stuff in there. And those are both well over £1,000, so they cost twice as much. That's a big jump, considering what this is and what this can do. I mean, if you've got two valve amps, you could buy two of these for the same price, and you could run them in complete stereo for the same price. Or save you money and just get the one. And I think that's a really, really good price point to be at. It's not cheap, but it's costed at that point, I think, so that it's got components in, so you can feel safe running your valve amp loudly into it, and also get that really, really good cab tone out of it. Because they could have cheaped out in several places, and I'm really quite glad they didn't, because I've always been wary of things like cheap load boxes, because they can potentially damage your amp. Old resistive load boxes, where they're basically just a big fat resistor in a box. Those tend to sound really sterile and static and flat, because they're not reacting with the amp backwards and forwards like a speaker does, which is where the reactive load comes from. There are all these little details that, when they add up, they make for a fantastic piece of gear. Just so you're aware, complete transparency, I've not been paid to make this video by Two Notes. They've sent me this for review, and it's probably going to have to go back at some point, which is a shame, because I would really, really like it. But then I do already have the Captor 8 and the Cab M, which, apart from the twin tracker feature and the extra attenuation and a few of the really nice features, I already have most of it, which, yeah, is, it would be really nice to have it all in one box. But I do make guitar cabinets for the Two Notes store. I'm one of the capture masters. So this Zilla right here, if you want the sound of this, that's the one that was on screen, the Big Beast, which is a Zilla 412 with vintage 30s. There are loads of other cabs on there as well. Check those out. If you get Wall of Sound, which is their software offering, or if you get Torpedo Captor X or Cab M or any of the hardware that they do, we sell loads of cabinets that you can buy there for that extra little bit of awesomeness on your sound. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you really enjoyed this. I certainly did. This is a serious piece of gear, and I'm looking forward to getting more out of it. You'll probably see it in some of the live streams as well, because we do quite a lot of live streaming at the moment, and we're doing a lot more in the future, a lot more live in the studio. We're going to be doing more live mixing where I'm at home. And with the whole COVID-19 lockdown thing, I've been doing a lot of that from my home little office studio, and I'll probably do more of that because that's been really successful. There's also a Discord where you can chat with us. There's the Patreon where you can support us. Subscribe and hit the like button for the video if you haven't already, and thank you, everybody, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.
Hey everyone, that might be the end of the video, but if you fancy carrying on this conversation, we have a Discord server, link is in the description. We're also on Patreon, which is something you can really help us with. We also are on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at Hot Pole Studios. See you there.